At the start of the Silver Age, when Marvel Comics really started to take off, they did something interesting with superhero love interests. Most superheroes at the time were men. Not all of them, but most. And since, with I think one exception, they were all heterosexuals, they were all in love with a woman. Now, at DC, during the Golden Age, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster hit a goldmine, one of many that is, with their creation of Lois Lane. As a reporter, Lois had the amazing ability to show up wherever Superman needs to go. Siegel and Schuster's Lane ended up being a brave collaborator with Superman, and they even intended to have her learn his identity very early in the comics, but were ultimately overruled by the editor. Now still, despite some crappier appearances, Lois remains one of DC's best characters, both in the comics and in its adaptations. Be it by mimicry or coincidence, other comic book character creators followed suit. Reporters became the default occupational girlfriends of superheroes. Vicky Vale for Batman, Iris West for the second Flash, Joan Mason for the first Blue Beetle, etc., etc. Obviously, it's not the only thing a love interest can do, and there were plenty of women that weren't really described as having jobs, save as a socialite. But this great idea that Siegel and Schuster had is still being copied to this day. Marvel, though, starting with the creation of the Fantastic Four, started an exciting new era with exciting, diverse love interests. Well, diverse in terms of occupations, not in skin color. Alicia Masters was a blind sculptor. Pepper Potts was an accountant PA. Jane Foster was a nurse. And also, more and more superheroines arrived on the scene. Sue Storm, Jean Grey, Wasp, Medusa. While DC would eventually catch up to Marvel, Marvel was really blazing trails in the 60s, and not just with having women occupying different roles. Though, sadly, women of color would not be prominent in comics until the 70s, Marvel introduced characters of diverse race, nationality, and physical conditions. Of course, Marvel's flagship character, Spider-Man, had plenty of love interests, even back in his early days. There was Liz Allen, who was just in high school. Don't worry, so was he at the time. There was Betty Brant, a secretary at a newspaper. See? What did I say? There was Gwen Stacy, a science major at college like Peter, and Mary Jane Watson, a model/actress. Now, obviously, Mary Jane is the one that Peter Parker ended up marrying, and the two had a lovely, long-lasting marriage until Peter sold it to a demon in one more day. Different versions of characters show up over time, be it in different realities or timelines, and sometimes the more popular aspects of a character in one iteration spill over into another. Over the years, Mary Jane has been a guidance counselor, a superhero, a rock star, a security guard, and several other things. But perhaps the most famous alternate universe in the Marvel multiverse is Earth 1610, the Ultimate Universe. At the turn of the century, Marvel's sales were struggling to the point of worried bankruptcy. As an attempt to ensnare new readers by removing the threat of overbearing continuity, Bill Jemas suggested creating a new universe with the popular characters beginning their careers in the modern world. Thus, the Ultimate Universe was born. Over time, the universe filled out, and it took on its own cumbersome continuity, but it was successful at giving Marvel a nice temporary boost in sales prior to the success that they saw at the resurgence of superhero movies. The Ultimate Universe, though originally intended to be closer to a straight modern retelling of classic characters, quickly evolved into a much darker, edgier version of the Marvel Universe, especially after 9/11. Characters were altered and changed, with several noticeable departures. Some changes were great, like Nick Fury becoming a manipulative spy master, making Sam Wilson a soldier, reintroducing Misty Knight, and the introduction of Miles Morales. Other changes were not so great, like making Wasp a cheater, Tony Stark allergic to air, Black Widow a child murderer, Hawkeye a mass murderer, Wanda and Pietro an incestuous couple, Captain America a xenophobe, Mr. Fantastic a supervillain, Sue Storm a sexual assailant, Jean Grey a warmonger, Wolverine a pedophile, Hulk a cannibal, Blob a cannibal, Ant-Man a cannibal, and Magneto a cannibal. Brian Michael Bendis started this universe with Ultimate Spider-Man, focusing on a Peter Parker much closer to the regular Parker than any of Millar or Ellis's adaptations. Sure, the storylines took different turns and new stories were told, but Peter was still pretty much his old self. Of course, the romances also changed, with Peter eventually ending up with everyone's favorite racist, Kitty Pryde, but he still had a romance with Mary Jane. Mary Jane was, in personality, quite similar to her 616 counterpart, but to allow her to show up where Peter would be, this Mary Jane would wish to be a broadcast journalist. This move was popular, once again, and I've seen a lot of people praise the change, so much so that other creators started using it. The Ultimate Spider-Man TV show, which, despite the name, had relatively little in common with the Ultimate Universe, made Mary Jane rather than Peter the one interested in journalism, striving to work at the Daily Bugle. Most recently, Marvel's Spider-Man on the PS4, an overall great game, features a number of playable scenes where Mary Jane is investigating various criminal activities for her job at the Daily Bugle. Or rather, she goes to places where she accurately guesses there will soon or are currently criminals. Now, this change has been praised for being a feminist step forward and allowing Mary Jane to have a greater part in the story. I personally think it is a bit of a step backwards, primarily for three main reasons. Firstly, and this is the most minor point, I do confess that the character change in MJ is a bit uninteresting. Characters change all the time, sure, but describing PS4 MJ as anything but a palette-swapped Lois Lane is a bit of a stretch. And honestly, I love Lois Lane. She's one of my favorite fictional characters, when handled correctly. But that doesn't mean I need to see the same character everywhere. Secondly, there's the whole damsel in distress trope. Don't get me wrong, model actress MJ was prone to distress as well, as clearly evidenced by the Sam Raimi trilogy. But the comic version of Mary Jane is less likely to be kidnapped. Sure, it happens time to time, but 616 Mary Jane was more likely to beat up a supervillain with a baseball bat than be caught by them. But by making her a reporter, she's in danger much more often. Like I said, Marvel's Spider-Man is great, but on 3 out of the 4 MJ missions, she needs her life saved by Peter. People better suited than me to discuss feminism have pointed out the problem with having a woman constantly in need of saving by a man. But no matter what, there is a certain unease brought about by this trope showing up in an otherwise really pleasant game. Thirdly, and I understand if this seems unusual, I think it represents a willingness to deem modeling as a lesser profession. There's a collective cultural idea that any career made with the effort of a physical body, rather than a mental one, is less honorable. This is definitely more likely to demonize women, as male athletes and soldiers are still considered honorable. But if you read the comment section of any news article about any female model, you'll find an abundance of hatred. Now, of course, a large portion of this is on the basis of gender, but there is also a noticeable despise for the profession itself, from both men and women. Many times female models are used to perpetuate male gaze, and I understand the desire to curtail that phenomenon. But modeling is not by definition a sexist job, nor is it something that can be accomplished without talent. Modeling serves to provide an example of how a product fits on a hypothetical consumer. Good models are acting the part of a satisfied customer, and serve more purpose than just being a conventionally attractive person. The rhetoric around modeling has long suggested it is a game for airheads and ingenues, and that if you were smart enough, you wouldn't take that job that relies solely on your impermanent body. The same often goes for actresses. Consider the words from the director of Spider-Man PS4. He wished to have a character that could assist Spider-Man in his spider activities, and deemed that the traditional Mary Jane couldn't do that, while an investigative journalist could. The problem is, investigative journalists don't really break and enter, or taser security guards, or steal from criminals. At least, the good ones don't. There's nothing that Mary Jane does that couldn't be done by any law-violating citizen. In fact, at the end of the game, spoilers, when she spies on Osborn, she can't even publish her findings because she would be admitting her guilt. She functions as an espionage agent, not a reporter. So why, then, if they needed someone that wouldn't act like a reporter, and is usually a model or actress, would they choose to make her a reporter? Look, I'm not accusing the team at Insomniac of a great conspiracy meant to demean women that choose a career in modeling, but I think there is this idea present in a lot of people to associate models and actresses with being generally unhelpful. Before I wrap up this video, I want to mention that there are, of course, models and actresses that accrue millions upon millions of dollars and hoard that wealth, and I do not think that they should get a free pass from being criticized. But the majority of models and actresses are poor, or at least working class, and they deserve decent representation in media as well.